So today let's talk about Gort. Day the Earth Stood Still, 1951 version. So if we're going to do that, let's start off with some production pictures I especially like. Kind of hard for me to get real close with this tripod on the camera. But here you can see in the prop shop the fiberglass Gort being built back in, what, 1950? If it was a 51 movie, probably 1950. Guy working on the head. And there's various other stills. There's one of the rubber costume. And way up there, it's another rubber costume. And let's see, that would be the rubber costume. What we're going to be talking about mostly today is the fiberglass unit, which was used as a stand-in when they're setting up lights, and is also used in the mechanical headshots. So anytime you saw the head tip down and the visor go up and then the light come on, you know you were looking at the fiberglass one, which survived the making of the movie, and according to what I was told, ended up being modified and used. Try to set this up, you got something to look at. Modified and used in kids' TV shows in the 50s or the 60s. Had a speaker put in its chest, things like that. So it was salvaged by director William Malone, and he cleaned it up and put it back right. And when I visited with him back in the 90s, one of my trips there, let's see if I can get this on camera. There would be a picture of me at Malone's house with the Gort, and I took a lot of pictures from angles, but more importantly, when I left, I had a full set of measurements and cardboard templates, which I was hoping to be able to talk some interested parties into recreating Gort based on the actual information. One of the more interesting parts, this is a screenshot from the movie, was when the visor went up, this part that was in here, in the mechanical head, it is a huge block of clear acrylic. It isn't open or backlit like we did. I mean, the thing was thick, and it's been routed and flame polished. And I'm guessing it was just to distort the light that they had back in there to make it look a little more mysterious, so you wouldn't know exactly what was going on. I think I have a few shots when Bill had it on display somewhere. Let's see. Yeah, let me get some of these in there. These weren't taken by me, but they were shared with me. That's a particularly good one because you can actually kind of see the visor up and see that large chunk of plexiglass that's in there. And there's a younger Bill Malone standing next to it, guarding Gort, as if Gort needed to be guarded. I mean, after all, he was a galactic policeman, right? Just a few more stills at wherever that display was. The fiberglass head that the actor wore in his rubber suit was different than the mechanical head. The fiberglass one that was worn by the costume person had holes under the chin. I'm suspecting not just for ventilation, but also would allow the person with the helmet on to be able to stare down to see where their feet were. Here's another one of the visor up where you can kind of see that chunk of plexiglass in there. Kind of cool. So, like I said, I wanted a Gort, and I was sure I could find a couple other people that did too to help share the cost, because making it was going to be quite expensive. So I ended up finding two other guys and myself, and we figured by the time we did the sculpting, the mold making, the casting, if we all sold maybe 1 or 2 Gorts a piece, that would help cover expenses and cut it down. It's going to be very expensive to do. So we started with a guy, and I don't have permission to talk about these people. I'm sure they'd give it if I asked. I'm just shooting this video and I hadn't asked him about it. So we'll just call this first guy Bill H. And he was in Texas. I was up in Seattle, Washington at the time. And he took the templates and measurements and pictures that I had, and he started with a huge block of foam. And on that, started with drawing an image for scale. And these are all Polaroids. Tells you kind of how long ago it was, right? And here is Bill H. with his block and pointing at it. And here he's started the sculpting process. Actually, this picture is ahead of itself, but you can see how it's starting to pop out of that as he sculpts it. Here should have been the one I showed you just before that, where you start really roughing it off and knocking off bits. And chiseling and scraping away at it. Give you an idea of scale and height. Here it is in front of his garage door. He's got pretty much all the body sculpted out except for the feet. And another one like that. And here he's got the feet knocked out. So what happens from there is we decided that for time and for money reasons, it would be cheaper if we sent the whole thing to the third person involved in this. And let's just call the third person Fred. We'll say Fred's down in Los Angeles. And he did a lot of dealings with different fiberglass houses and finishing houses where they could do all the sanding and filling. So they took this original rough head, which had been sculpted by Bill, and fiberglass put on it, which meant it needs to be sanded and smooth. But more than that, it was a little too wide. It needed to be cut and put back together, and it wasn't completely symmetrical. So they needed to rework that. So there was a whole lot of rework done to the headpiece to get it right. And of course, the body itself had massive sanding and work that had to be done. Here is a master earpiece being held up next to the head that was being worked on. And the master earpiece was used to then make silicone rubber molds by myself, and then we'd cast the ears in resin. Now, before you can make a mold of this huge foam Gort, you have to put metal, well, it doesn't have to be metal, but a good shop is going to use metal. You cut thin slits and everything where the parting line's going to be, and you slide in these metal shims. And the whole thing has to be flashed out that way, so you can end up making a front and a back mold on the body, separate molds for the hands, separate molds for the head. And you have to be able to separate these molds, and that's why you really need a professional fiberglass shop when you're working on something this huge. Here's a kind of a close-up of the foot, for example. See the hunk of metal that's put in there is where the parting line was going to be. And here's pictures of me with the 4 that I ended up with at the beginning to figure out how to do the mechanical head aspects and finishing and painting and things like that. Me wearing one of the Gort heads. So, the real job was working out all of the mechanics. Here I've done some sanding and priming on one there, and there's an inside shot of one of the very early heads working things out. But the long and the short of it is I wanted a single motor with a cam, and the cam would move an arm which would make the head tip And the head had to be balanced so that it would want to return back, tip back on its own. I wanted the tipping action to make it go forward, be the motorized part. And then I needed a crank off that cam for lifting the visor at the right time, because I really wanted the head to tip first, then the visor. And then everything was, say, down and visor up. You want it to stop, and then you want your light source to come on, and I wanted the light to fade in and fade out to add a little more effect to the whole thing. I'm up on a ladder working on Gort. And in the end, I could show you more pictures of Gort, but I mean, he's standing right there. In the end, we ended up adding not just that mechanical effect with that light effect. Here's a remote for him. But he ended up adding an audio effect and turning it into a show. So you could have a dialogue track, and then you could have the controlling track that controls when the head tips down and the visor goes up, for example. So we did several versions where we took sound bites from the movie, put them in the one track, and then the control track has a tone on it, and the tone is what controls the relay to tell the head when to, you know, be on or be off, and all that kind of stuff. So you can see the head's gone back again and the visor's closed. Trying to give you a side shot because it's easier to see things happening from the side. And then it's been triggered, it's going down again. Try not to back into anything and look through the camera viewfinder at the same time to keep everything in frame. And not easy to do. But there you have it. Some of the Gort history. It was a project that was going to be too expensive for just one person to do, so I had to get a few pals involved, and we had to move a couple of them to help cover costs because it's quite expensive. This was back in the 90s. But being based off templates from the actual screen-used movie fiberglass insert, it really helped make the thing quite accurate. And now I can just stop him, I think. Maybe not. I think we want to catch this part before we stop him. And that's a good place to end our video.